Imagine you're standing in a muddy, overgrown field. Like your hands are pressed hard into the cold dirt and your legs are coiled tight beneath you.
Just hovering slightly on your tiptoes.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Radiating that kind of intense physical tension you'd see in an Olympic sprinter right before the starting gunfires.
Yeah.
But you aren't looking at a track.
No, you're looking at something else entirely.
Right. You're staring off into the dark at a glowing forbidden rocket factory. Which is wild, but according to the source material we're pulling from for today's deep dive, this incredibly specific posture is exactly what the inside of a fully functional, healthy adult mind should look like.
It really is wild. I mean, it completely shatters the conventional wisdom we have about what it even means to be a dreamer.
Oh, for sure.
Usually society treats dreaming as this passive retreat from reality. You know, a sort of screensaver your brain just turns on when you go to sleep.
Or like a harmless distraction during a really boring meeting.
Exactly. But the poetic memories of Professor Cromwell Smith, which we're looking at today, they present a radical alternative. Dreaming is not an escape from reality. It's the active, deliberate, cognitive machinery that we use to shape it.
And to understand the mechanics of this machinery, we kind of have to trace the professor's philosophy back to its absolute origin.
Yeah.
So we're pulling heavily today from his childhood recollections. These are set in the small Welsh town of Hay-on-Wye, specifically inside this place called the Sutton Raleigh Bookstore for the Young.
Established in 1893.
Right. And you have to picture it. It's filled with the scent of old leather, ancient paper, and the rhythmic ticking of this antique wall clock.
And running that shop is Victoria Sutton Raleigh, or as the young professor calls her, Mrs. V.
Mrs. V, yes.
She operates less like a typical bookstore owner and more like like a literary architect for the young minds that walk through her door.
Over tea and Scottish shortbread, no less.
Naturally.
Yeah.
And she imparts this foundational metaphor to the young Erasmus, the idea of magical magnifying glasses.
Which, on the surface, that sounds like a super whimsical thing to tell a child. But she isn't talking about playing pretend.
No, not at all.
She is talking about a perceptual tool. She tells him that dreamers are essentially wizards because they use these lenses to bend and filter reality. Like, they don't just see the world as a static, unchangeable environment.
They view it as raw material.
Raw material, exactly.
And if you're going to use that raw material, you have to know how to detach from the immediate, overwhelming stimuli of your present reality. Mrs. V illustrates this detachment through a poem she reads to him. It's called The Balloon Salesman.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the imagery in this poem is so vivid. You've got this young man in a tam o' shanter wandering through a park, and he's trailed by this massive cloud of balloons.
But he only sells to small children.
Right, because he isn't peddling latex and helium. He is dealing in unfiltered dreams. And the entry fee for these dreams is entirely based on cognitive engagement.
Like the kid who stops him.
Yeah, this young kid with a wide stance and crossed arms steps right into the salesman's path and just starts interrogating him.
Yeah.
Like, why do you sell balloons?
And the salesman doesn't get annoyed.
Not at all. He declares it a lost day. He recognizes that the child's relentless curiosity is the exact mechanism required to unlock the finer details of life.
So he rewards him.
It does. The salesman rewards that inquiry by taking the kid on a massive, rainbow-colored balloon right high above the park.
And I think the altitude and the vehicle in this poem are doing some very heavy lifting, metaphorically speaking. Because when you are in a hot air balloon, you're hovering.
You're just drifting.
Right. The poem specifically highlights how everything below moves at a crawl. From that altitude, you stop seeing individual trees or distinct puddles, and you start seeing the macro structures.
The big picture.
Yeah, the lakes and rivers suddenly appear as the blood vessels of nature. You're witnessing the interconnected life force of the landscape.
You're zooming out from all the little microstressors to see the underlying systems. But the terrifying and, I guess, necessary part of this flight is the lack of a steering wheel.
That is the defining characteristic of an unfiltered dream. There is no predetermined destination.
Which is so different from how we normally operate.
Exactly. When we operate in our waking adult lives, our prefrontal cortex is constantly steering. We are obsessed with outcomes, efficiencies, and step-by-step logic.
Like, from point A to point B.
Always. But the balloon ride represents the suspension of that executive control. It provides absolute freedom because the journey is unconstrained by immediate utility.
You're disconnected from the gravity of consequence.
Right, which allows your mind to combine concepts and visualize desires exactly as you truly feel about them, not as logic dictates you should.
But the poem doesn't just let us stay in the clouds, unfortunately. It brings us crashing back down to what Mrs. V refers to as ground level.
The dull, sour life.
The dull, sour life.
Yeah.
That the salesman points out that children are his only customers because adults have largely lost the capacity for this kind of untethered thought. And it is a deeply empathetic, albeit brutal, critique.
It really is.
But adults live this dull, sour life at ground level, not by choice, but by conditioning. Like you become an adult, and suddenly you're walking with your head down, staring intensely at the pavement, just entirely weighed down by the gravity of responsibilities.
Well, it's an adaptive defense mechanism. When you are burdened by societal expectations, mortgages, career ladders, and just endless obligations.
That's exhausting.
It is. Looking up at the vast, unstructured sky is cognitively expensive. It is easier and it feels safer to just stare at the next 3 feet of pavement in front of you.
Just focus on your next step.
Exactly. And that narrowing of vision is what breeds a growing cynicism. You stop believing the sky is relevant because your immediate survival depends on navigating the cracks in the sidewalk. Reality simply takes control of the lens.
And when you're stuck staring at the pavement, you inevitably start bumping into everyone else who is doing the exact same thing.
That's where the friction comes in.
Yeah, the friction of ground-level living generates a highly contagious emotional virus. The professor vividly recounts this in Chapter 6 of our source text. He basically arrives at Mrs. V's bookshop in an absolute panic because his entire town seems to have lost its mind.
The sensory overload in his recollection is just palpable. He describes this absolute cacophony of frustration.
Everyone is yelling.
Everyone. A cab driver is screaming at an elderly pedestrian. The milkman is throwing a fit over kids breaking his bottles. The mail carrier is aggressively berating a pregnant woman just for walking too slowly.
The madness.
It is. The young Erasmus was even chased out of his own home by his mother simply for pointing out a white hair on her head. So he concludes that the world is objectively hostile, which raises an important question, right? Mrs. V delivers this profound psychological challenge to him. She asks him to examine his own perceptual baseline. She proposes that he might not just be passively observing a hostile world. Rather, his own negative attitude is acting as a life lens. He is projecting his internal anxiety outward, selectively tuning in to the frequency of anger.
Wow. So he's looking for it.
Exactly. She describes angry individuals as body snatchers. When someone screams in traffic, their lack of emotional regulation seeks to hijack yours. They want to pull you into their physiological state of distress.
Misery loves company.
Right. But the true danger Mrs. V identifies is that anger doesn't even require an external catalyst. If you wear lenses coated in frustration, your brain will proactively seek out threats and irritations to justify that internal state.
You essentially manufacture a hostile world.
You manufacture a hostile world to match your hostile lens, and that entirely poisons your baseline capacity for happiness.
Okay, I have to jump in here, because that sounds highly enlightened when you're sitting in a quiet, leather-scented bookshop drinking tea. But let's test this against reality. If I merge onto the highway tomorrow morning, and some guy aggressively cuts me off, swerves into my lane, and screams out his window at me, I mean, I am not projecting that.
No, you're not.
That is an objective external hostility. My magical magnifying glasses are going straight into the glove box because my nervous system is flooded with adrenaline. How does this philosophy actually survive the neurological reality of gridlock and daily conflict?
That is the exact friction point where philosophy has to become utilitarian. Mrs. V doesn't suggest you just smile vacantly at the screaming driver.
Thank goodness.
Right. Instead, she teaches the professor a specific cognitive behavioral intervention called the spinning wheel of life. The framework posits that life operates in elliptical curves.
Elliptical curves.
Everything is a cyclical loop, meaning every ending is intrinsically the beginning of a new rotation.
Okay, but how does visualizing an ellipse stop my blood pressure from spiking in traffic?
It interrupts the linear escalation of stress. When that driver cuts you off, your brain processes it as a linear attack. Like, my safety and peace were just threatened, and the situation is escalating toward a crisis.
Right. My amygdala triggers the fight-or-flight response.
Exactly. The spinning wheel framework forces a cognitive reappraisal. If life is a constant flowing loop, then the driver cutting you off isn't a terminal crisis. It is simply a temporary bend in the curve.
You alter the perceived duration and significance of the event.
Precisely. By zooming out and recognizing the cyclical nature of experience, you neutralize the immediate blinding rush of anger with context.
Yeah.
You shift your analytical focus.
You stop reacting to what was threatened.
Right. Instead of reacting to what was momentarily threatened, your peaceful commute, you proactively engage patience and compassion. You recognize that the aggressive driver is trapped in their own ground-level, pavement-staring misery. And this isn't about excusing their behavior. It's about protecting your own cognitive real estate. By refusing to let the body snatchers hijack your emotional state, you clear the grime off your lenses.
You reset your baseline, which brings us right back to the image we started with.
Yes, it does.
Because once you wipe the adult cynicism and the contagion of anger off those lenses, you are left with a blank slate. You have reclaimed your imagination. But you need to know how to deploy it.
You need a focus.
Right. Cromwell Smith visualizes this exact deployment mechanism in the second poem Mrs. V shares with him, The Boy in the Picture.
And here's where it gets really interesting. If the balloon ride represented the total suspension of executive control, the boy in the picture represents the hyper-focused re-engagement of it.
Yeah, the dichotomy in his physical posture is masterful.
It really is. His hands are pressed into the dirt, his feet are hovering, his muscles are coiled, his body is anchored in the gritty, immediate reality of the present moment.
But his head is described as completely calm.
Completely calm, he's gazing into the distance, entirely detached from the physical strain. He is, as the poem states, living in the future.
It's a perfect physical manifestation of visualization. His brain is essentially transmitting this high-fidelity simulation of the future to his nervous system.
It's priming his body.
Yes, his body is tense because it's already preparing to execute the actions required by that future state. But what is fueling that visualization? Like, what is he staring at while crouching in the mud?
He's peeking at something he has been explicitly warned to avoid.
Exactly. He is watching his quirky, hermit-like neighbor building a forbidden rocket factory inside a barn.
And the societal context here is crucial. This boy is engaging in what the professor later defines as constructive rebellion.
Constructive rebellion?
Right. We usually associate rebellion with destruction, the teenager breaking curfew, the employee sabotaging the workflow. But constructive rebellion is the refusal to accept the boundaries of the present consensus for the sake of creation.
Oh, I like that. It's the difference between taking a sledgehammer to a load-bearing wall just to watch the drywall crumble versus carefully tearing down a partition because you already have the blueprints for a massive remodeling project.
That is an excellent way to frame it. The townspeople look at this quirky neighbor with his funny gait and his odd voice, watching his homemade rockets fail repeatedly, and they just dismiss him.
They're the voice of ground-level adulthood.
Exactly. They insist that the improbable is synonymous with the impossible. But the boy doesn't see the failures as a deterrent. He sees a relentless determination to defy gravity.
He sees the effort.
He realizes that genuine innovation, whether it's building a rocket or designing a new life, requires a fundamental disrespect for the current limitations of reality.
He watches that barn spilling dazzling light into the night, and he decides that he too wants to reach the stars. The rebellion isn't against his parents or the town. It is against the concept of impossibility itself.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, when we synthesize these two poems, we uncover the author's core philosophical architecture.
How so?
Well, The Balloon Salesman provides the unconstrained environment necessary for inspiration to strike. The boy in the picture provides the disciplined, relentless focus required to execute that inspiration against the resistance of the real world.
Ah, I see.
Together, they prove that dreaming is a highly active, reality-shaping force. It is the ultimate exercise in self-determination.
So what does this all mean? Mrs. V basically distills this into a formula, right?
Yeah.
Inspiration plus blissfulness.
Yes.
You have to be inspired by the improbable, and you have to find the deep, intrinsic joy in the pursuit of it, regardless of the immediate failures. If you have those two elements, you possess the essential ingredients of a happy life, because you are no longer a victim of your circumstances.
You are the architect of them.
You're the architect.
Yeah.
And the text offers this brilliant mechanical explanation for how this architecture is drafted. Think of your conscious brain moving through your daily life as a silent witness.
Just passively observing.
Right. It is essentially an archivist. It logs every conversation, every failure, every moment of gridlock, every sunset, and every book you read. It just files the raw data away.
But the dream factory, that internal machinery Mrs. V is trying to activate, Operates like a highly advanced CAD program running in the background.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
It takes that massive, mundane inventory of files and begins running complex simulations. It pulls a piece of an old memory, combines it with a random conversation you had yesterday, cross-references it with an improbable desire.
And suddenly, it generates a viable blueprint for a future that didn't exist a moment ago.
Exactly. It synthesizes the scrap metal of your past experiences to build the rocket. The tragedy of adulthood isn't that this factory gets dismantled. The machinery is incredibly resilient.
The tragedy is that we voluntarily pull the plug.
We do. We stop feeding it the fuel of inspiration and blissfulness because we're just too busy managing the immediate anxieties of ground-level survival.
We convinced ourselves that the CAD program is a waste of processing power when there are bills to pay and emails to answer. But the core mission of this entire text is to remind you that your factory is fully intact.
It never left.
The machinery is just sitting there in the dark waiting for you to wipe the contagion of cynicism off your lenses, look up for the pavement, and throw the switch.
And if there is any doubt regarding the efficacy of this process, the source material delivers a stunning validation at the very end of the chapter.
The twist.
The twist, yes. After Mrs. V finishes reading The Boy in the Picture, after painting this visceral image of the tense child kneeling in the dirt, staring longingly at the forbidden glow of the rocket factory, she closes the book.
She leans across the table.
She leans across the table, looks the young Erasmus right in the eye, and asks a simple question. That's you, isn't it?
And the young boy offers a shy smile and says, "Yes, Mrs. V, that's definitely me."
It completely recontextualizes everything we've discussed. The boy in the dirt isn't a fictional character in a fable. It's the author himself.
The eminent Professor Cromwell Smith.
The very man whose philosophical teachings now fill auditoriums and shape minds was once just a kid in the mud engaging in constructive rebellion. His seemingly impossible dream of defining his own path and reaching his own metaphorical stars wasn't just idle fantasy.
It was the literal foundation of the reality he eventually built and lived. The blueprint worked. The factory produced the future. Which leaves us with a necessary and hopefully slightly uncomfortable question for you to mull over as we close out today's deep dive.
Something to really think about.
Take an inventory of your own cognitive landscape right now. Where is your attention directed? Are you staring at the pavement, navigating the endless, immediate friction of ground-level adulthood? Or do you still have an eye on the horizon?
Think about your own forbidden rocket factory.
Yeah. What is that improbable, slightly irrational project or career pivot or life change you've been secretly peeking at? What is the dream you've kept hidden in the barn because the collective voice of cynical adulthood told you it was a waste of time, or too late, or statistically impossible?
What would happen if you stopped accepting that consensus?
What would happen if you finally wiped the grime off your lenses, visualized exactly where you want to be, and allowed yourself to coil up and sprint directly toward the impossible?